Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Queen of Bitter Thorn by L Moody, narrated by Davies. Chapter 1. Sleep often made the worst problems seem more approachable, but not always. When Elora woke from her spot at the bottom of a hill, a thin layer of ice had formed over her boots. That alone meant her problems had only compounded overnight. Frost curled around every surface in Noble Rose. It stretched over cobblestones and encased grass blades. Elora had only her leather pants and fitted leather shirt to stave off the chill. While traveling the night before, those had been sufficient, but then she had to stop and rest. Bumps rose on the skin of her arms as she lifted her head from the frosty grass beneath her. 2 braids still hung over her shoulders, but thick sections of hair had come loose from them. Untying the leather strings at the end of each braid, she used her fingers to comb through the mess her hair had become. Her shoulders ached every time she lifted her hands higher than her heart. She had flown as far as she could the night before. She had flown faster and farther than she even thought possible. It still wasn't enough. Even after her beloved got kidnapped by the fearsome High Queen Alessandra, Elora couldn't fly indefinitely. She had found a cozy-looking spot at the bottom of a hill in Noble Rose to rest her head for the night. Manicured rose bushes and a quaint cluster of daisies made the space look inviting, warm even. Unfortunately, the looks had been deceiving. The spot grew colder throughout the night. Before day dawned, she woke from the cold, attempting to burrow into her bones. Her muscles ached, but moving was the only tool she had to stave off the chill. After rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she brushed ice crystals off her leather shirt and pants. Even her braided belt that contained purple ribbons from her mother's old skirt sparkled with a thin layer of ice. High Queen Alessandra's influence over the court of Noble Rose continued to spread. Soon the court would probably look exactly like Fairfrost. That gnarled thought felt as icy as the air. At least Elora's sword still worked, no matter the temperature. She gripped its leather hilt and pushed out the wings from her back. A shudder rocked through her entire body, nearly dropping her to her knees. Gasping, she pulled the wings back. There would be no flying today. Even with her face strength and healing, she had pushed herself too hard. Her muscles groaned as she leaned over to catch her breath. A part of her knew she was only prolonging the inevitable. At some point, she would have to look up above, where the sprites were, or where they should have been. Knowing she might not like what she found, she had avoided glancing upward. But if she couldn't fly, she had no other choice. Tension rose into her throat, crashing its way past the little warmth that still lingered there. She glanced up. No sprites. Ice crystals seemed to form along the sides of her throat when she tried to swallow. The sprites still hadn't returned after the fight with High Queen Alessandra the evening before. Tension forced Elora onto the balls of her feet, but it did nothing to temper the fear and regret roiling her insides. Her fingers twitched over her sword hilt. She looked forward. A golden enchantment continued to shimmer just ahead of her. She had flown through most of the night, but still managed to stay within the large bubble of enchantment Prince Brannick had created the night before. The enchantment protected her and everyone else from High Queen Alessandra's enchantment of fear that still poisoned the air in every part of Faerie. If Elora stepped past Brannick's protective enchantment, fear would press in on her from all sides. Her thoughts would writhe with memories strong enough to collapse her. She had mastered many of her emotions, but fear was clearly her weakness. She glanced up again. The tiniest part of her heart dared to hope that a single sprite might float somewhere up above. Tansy was her friend. If any of the sprites had dared to return, it would be her. But the familiar sparkle of pink inside a green glow was nowhere within Elora's sight. Taking a deep breath, Elora swallowed again. She bit into her bottom lip as she scanned the landscape ahead of her. No village stood nearby. The closest thing she saw to any kind of civilization was a male fae and a small brownie who stood on a narrow cobblestone path across a small field. Tightness overtook each of Elora's muscles as she forced herself to breathe. No sprites meant she couldn't send a message. Sore muscles meant she couldn't fly. She had to get help. The Fae on the cobblestone path could open a fairy door for Elora, though he'd probably require a bargain or debt of some kind to do it. But Elora could get help. She just had to step outside the protection of Brannick's enchantment. She just had to let fear consume her. Her heart skittered. She fought the urge to brush the frost from her clothes. She had already done it more than necessary. No frost even remained. As if of their own accord, her hands flicked across her leather pants anyway. At least it gave her something to do while she considered her choices again. If she stayed inside the protective enchantment in Noble Rose, perhaps someone would eventually come for her. Brannick had been captured by High Queen Alessandra, and Vesper couldn't enter Noble Rose without a special enchantment, since he was still technically banished. But maybe Lirin would come? The little flame of hope within her snuffed out. Even if another Fae did try to find her, Elora had flown so much the night before, no one would ever know where she had traveled to now. Ice stretched over the lump in her throat as she swallowed. She took a step forward. Her gut rolled over on itself. Sucking in a shallow breath, she gripped her sword hilt for strength. She swallowed again. With one last glance over her shoulder, she finally bolted forward. Her feet flew over the frosty grass. Fear poured over her like a bucket of water retrieved from a half-frozen lake. After the initial shock, more fear needled under her skin with icy tentacles. Her breath hitched. Her feet stumbled. Memories poured into her mind, giving life to the ice under her skin. She remembered everything in flashes. A sharp knife tip at her throat, smacking lips that tasted blood, chains that bound her so tight she couldn't even dream of escape, a breath that smelled of sour milk, one that wouldn't leave her face. The shudder that shook through her body sent her feet sprawling forward fast, too fast. Her knees hit a grassy knoll that sagged under her weight. She gulped in air, but it felt like she was sucking up chunks of ice. Chains closed in around her waist, her arms. Even knowing the chains existed only in her memories, they still seemed to weigh her down as she forced herself to her feet again. She had to keep running. The male Fae she had spotted earlier was nearer now. Once she moved just a little closer, she'd be within shouting distance. Her chest constricted. It felt like glass on the brink of shattering. She continued to gulp in air, but each breath seemed shallower than the last. Her feet pounded against the grassy field. She refused to acknowledge how each step sent a flurry of frost even higher up her boots. Maybe it would help to close her eyes. The moment her eyelids dropped, she wasn't greeted with the safety of black she expected. Instead, a pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared in her mind. Ansel's eyes. Her chest clenched even tighter. The glass shattered. Her feet stumbled so hard it sent her sprawling. Her nose pressed into a patch of icy grass. One shoulder throbbed where it had landed on a sharp rock. Rolling to her other side, she curled her legs up until she hugged them tight against her chest. Whatever release she expected from her tears didn't come. They pooled out of her eyes, nearly freezing before they could even trickle down her cheeks. Her body shivered as she tried to rock herself in a rhythmic motion. Fear gnawed at her insides. It tore her apart, laughing at every victory she had ever claimed. Ansel would capture her again. She knew it. He would steal her away, drain her of blood. He would break her. He would destroy her. It didn't matter how many times she had protected herself in the past. She had tried to fight in Fairfrost Palace, and she had still failed. Ansel would come for her again, and she would fail. If the mere memory of him sank her into a sobbing mess in the middle of the Noble Rose countryside, how much worse could he do once he brought her back to his home? Ice trailed down her spine. Her body shook so hard she nearly bit off her tongue. Her legs curled tighter against her chest, her tears turned to ice on her cheeks. She only vaguely recognized the tendrils of frost that crawled up her boots and leather pants. The frost existed because of High Queen Alessandra. The fear in the air lingered because of High Queen Alessandra. Was the frost now overtaking Elora because she had succumbed to the fear? It didn't matter. Only 3 things filled her mind, no matter how she tried to push them away. Yellow eyes, a knife at the neck, chains that held her still. Yellow eyes, a knife at the neck, chains that held her still. With her eyes closed firmly, she pressed the heels of her hands into them. 1,000 bursting colors filled her vision when she pushed harder on her eyes. Even those didn't remove the flashes. Yellow eyes. Her gut churned, sending bile to her throat. A knife at the neck. The muscles in her limbs locked, making it impossible to move them. Chains that held her still. Screams erupted from her mouth, hanging in the air around her. No more. A quivering breath shook through her, but she had forced some air into her chest at least. She gulped in even more. Her knees wobbled. She forced herself to her feet anyway. One more breath. Tears continued to slide down her cheeks, but they made it to her chin before they froze. She had succumbed. She still succumbed to the fear, but she would not let it control her. Her boot hovered for a long moment before she finally took a single step forward. The visions continued to dance in her mind. Yellow eyes. With her first steady breath, she took a second step forward. A knife at the neck. She swallowed and gripped her sword. Chains that held her still. It didn't matter how her muscles ached. She pushed the wings out of her back anyway. More steadying breaths calmed her as she lifted off the ground. Fear could stab her and shock her, but she wouldn't allow it to keep her down. Her wings beat the air, forcing it into submission. Elora flew. By the time she reached the Fae on the cobblestone path, the frost stretching over her boots and pants had melted. Her feet landed on the grass with a little jolt. She sprinted the rest of the way to the Fae. By the time she reached him, she was breathless, but not too breathless to speak. "I need your help." The Fae wore a thick red tunic belted with a cream sash. Under the tunic, he had tight-fitting tan pants. A stiff cream collar circled his neck, poking out from the red tunic. At the sight of Elora, the Fae jumped back in fright. He clapped both hands over his mouth and ducked behind a nearby rose bush. Shoving a hand out, he tugged the little brownie behind the rose bush with him. The bush didn't do much to hide him or the brownie, which he seemed to realize at the same moment as Elora. The fear in the air clearly affected him as much as it did her. With his nose twitching and his forehead turning crimson, the Fae jabbed a finger forward. "You!" "What?" Elora's eyes opened wide at the accusation. The female brownie peeked around the rosebush, just long enough to wrinkle her short nose. "This is your fault." The brownie turned her face upward at the male Fae in the red tunic. "She is the one, right, Deacon?" Ice crystallized over the hem of Deacon's red tunic as he stood. He glanced down at his brownie before turning back to Elora with a glare. "This is her fault." "What is?" Elora's words came out in a whisper. "This," he gestured over the frosty landscape, "all of it." Now he gestured toward the air. Despite the fear still prickling inside her, Elora folded her arms over her chest. "How is this my—" "You helped Prince Brannock win the testing." Deacon's eyebrows twisted even closer together as he marched forward. "If High Queen Alessandra had won, we would have accepted her rule without question. She never would have controlled us with—" He shuddered. "This fear." It took far too much effort to brush the words away. Instead, Elora dropped her hands to her sides. "If you help me, I can rescue Prince Brannock, and he can overthrow High Queen Alessandra. I just need you to open a door for me to—" Her voice trailed off as she considered a destination. A fairy door had to open to a place, not to a person. If she told the Fae to open a door to Quintus's house in Bitter Thorn, would that be enough? The Fae probably didn't even know who Quintus was. Taking a deep breath, Elora continued. "To Bitter Thorn Castle." If she went to the castle, Kaya, the dryad, would be able to open a door to Quintus's house. Hopefully, her sisters and the others would be there waiting. The brownie's squat nose seemed to fold in on itself as it wrinkled more. "We would never help you." It was unrealistic to expect them to help without a favor of some kind, but Elora still tripped over her next words. "I will owe you a debt." A scoff tore from Deacon's lips. He scowled. "Noble Rose is nothing because of you. What could you possibly offer that we might want?" The question had merit. Even as Elora's thumb stroked her sword hilt, no ideas came, but she couldn't give up, not after facing her fear. Her head snapped up with a jerk. "I will teach you how to control your emotions. You see how I can continue even despite the fear?" A look passed between the Fae and the brownie. Deacon raised an eyebrow at her. "I saw how you crumpled once you left the protective enchantment." She nodded eagerly. "Yes, but look at me now. I feel normal again. Can you do that with the fear all around us?" His eyebrow arched higher. When he glanced down at the brownie, they both looked more intrigued than before. Hopefully she wouldn't need more than that. Gripping her sword for strength, Elora rolled her shoulders back. "I propose a bargain." Tingles spread all through her shoulders and down to her fingertips. She had made several bargains in Faerie, but this was the first she had ever proposed herself. It felt special. "You must open a door for me to Bitter Thorn Castle. If you do, I will teach you later how to control your emotions." The brownie's ears flopped with a nod when she looked up at Deacon. "I accept." His brownie's approval must have been the only thing Deacon needed. Waving one hand, a circle, a swirling tunnel of red roses and white lilies, appeared in front of them. Elora started forward. Luckily, the Fae had not specified when Elora would have to teach him how to control emotions. Truthfully, she could only barely do it herself. She probably wouldn't make much of a teacher, but she would deal with that problem on another day. For now, she had more important tasks ahead of her. Rescue Prince Brannock. Overthrow High Queen Alessandra. Her fingertips tingled as she stepped toward the swirling tunnel. Maybe it was her imagination, but she sensed purple sparks bursting from her fingers just as she entered the door. Chapter 2. Even before stepping out of the door, Elora knew something had gone wrong. She couldn't smell the familiar scents of wet bark or wild berries. Her feet faltered over a rocky path. The fresh, open air drifting around her sent her gut into a knotted mess. Mistmount. She recognized the court from its scent alone, but ignored the truth until she saw the mountain ledge she had just stepped onto. The fairy door behind her disappeared before she could dart back inside it. For a single moment, she convinced herself to be brave. If she stood on a mountain, then Ansel's home, which had been in a valley, couldn't possibly be nearby. In the next moment, she dropped down to the ground. Her legs curled into a shivering ball while the images of yellow eyes, a knife, and chains swirled in her mind. Even in Mistmount, fear poisoned the air. High Queen Alessandra's enchantment stretched over every corner of Faerie, seeping into every heart. Elora could handle grief. She could work through anger, but fear stung her the way no other emotion did because she had felt it too deeply. If Ansel and High Queen Alessandra had captured her before she had used the balance shard, she probably never would have survived the change to Fae. As she had done in Noble Rose, she took deep, steadying breaths. She could beat this. She was stronger than the fear, bigger than it. Even if her knees trembled, she would get to her feet. Yes, she had traveled to Ansel's court. Yes, she feared he would be hidden around every corner, and yes, she could push forward all the same. Her gut clenched tighter as she took her first step. It rocked as she took another, but her feet moved forward still. She focused on her location. That devious Fae Deacon had entered her bargain and promised to send her to Bitter Thorn Castle. Why did the door send her to Mistmount instead? The question had deeper implications once she considered it. Faerie itself forced all creatures to keep their bargains. She ran through the words of the bargain in her mind, but it didn't make any sense. Deacon had agreed to send her to Bitter Thorn. She should have been in Bitter Thorn. How did she end up in Mistmount instead? Yellow wildflowers and tufts of grass lined the rocky path beneath her feet. Questions churned in her mind while she started down the mountain. The purple sparks. She bit one lip while her mind whirled. It had only lasted a fleeting moment, but purple sparks had burst from her fingertips just before she stepped into Deacon's door. Did those sparks have something to do with her ending up in Mistmount instead of Bitter Thorn? As soon as she considered it, she flipped the thought away without hesitation. That was impossible. She had only used magic twice since getting it. The first time had been when a Demorog attacked her, and technically, only her sword used magic, not her. The second time had been when she held the crown of Bitter Thorn, but the only reason she had magic then was because the crown enhanced her magic. She had never used magic on her own, not purposefully. The purple sparks couldn't have had anything to do with the door leading her to the wrong place. Her body froze when she noticed a cave entrance near the path ahead. Clenching her jaw, she forced herself forward. There was no sense fearing the cave until she peeked inside it. Even if Ansel was in Mistmount, what were the odds he stood inside that exact cave? Sweat broke out across her forehead. Her hands shivered hard enough to knock into her thighs. She continued anyway. Once she neared the cave, she could sprint forward until she had passed the cave entrance. Even if Faye stood inside, they wouldn't notice her if she moved fast enough. Hopefully. Her heart jumped. Unless she made too much noise. Without thinking, she broke into a run. If noise was a problem, she had made too much already. Better to pass the cave as quickly as possible and hope for the best. A pair of voices drifted through the air, stilling her movements. Terror washed over her, but recognition dawned almost as fast. By the time she reached the cave entrance, she had already stopped running. Instead of sprinting past, she turned to look directly into the cave. Two startled faces stared back at her. A female with white blonde hair and a friendly smile held onto a male with light brown hair and ice-blue eyes. "Tindra?" Disbelief filled Elora's voice, almost turning it into a chuckle. "Severin?" Relief cut away most of the terror that gripped their features, but the two Fae still looked distressed. They had no reason to fear Elora, though. They had helped her get into Fairfrost Palace and rescue the sprites. Even though that mission had gone terribly wrong, these two had done nothing to cause it. High Queen Alessandra's brother stood taller, shaking another measure of fear off his face. "How did you find us?" Severin asked. Something twisted inside Elora, right around her navel. She looked over her shoulder. Her gaze turned down toward her fingertips, but she shook the thoughts away before they could form. "I have no idea. I had no intention of finding you." Severin and his beloved glanced at each other with a knowing look. Or maybe it was a searching look. They seemed to understand each other, but Elora certainly didn't. "What happened?" Tindra's friendly smile returned, and this time it only held a sliver of her earlier fear. Without Elora's permission, her hands lifted as she glanced down at them again. She forced them back to her sides and curled them into fists. "A Fae in Noble Rose was supposed to open a door for me that led to Bitter Thorn Castle. He agreed to the bargain, but when I walked through the door, I ended up here." A crease appeared between Severin's eyebrows while he tapped his chin. At least they were as puzzled as her. Tindra beckoned Elora toward herself. "You should come in. We have an enchantment on the cave entrance that keeps the fear out." Her shoulders gave the slightest twitch. "Well, mostly keeps it out." Nodding, Elora stepped inside the cave. She didn't respond, though. Her thoughts turned back to the door. "I thought no one could defy a bargain. I thought Faerie itself makes it impossible. The door should have taken me to Bitter Thorn Castle, right?" With a gentle tug, Tindra sat Elora down on a tree stump that had a burlap-wrapped pillow on top. Allowing herself to glance around, Elora took in the rest of the cave. One end had boulders with cut and smoothed surfaces, so they served as tables. Clay and glass jars of various sizes were scattered across the surface. Piles of papers and a single feather pen sat among them. A basket on one corner of the table held herbs, flowers, pebbles, and various other flora she didn't recognize. Tindra went straight toward the rock table and began measuring liquids from the various jars. Did anything strange happen just before or while you were going through the door? Severin moved to sit next to a small fire encircled by large rocks. He stoked the flames with a bendy stick, then turned to a ceramic plate with vegetables that were halfway through being chopped. Using a short knife, he continued the process. Elora's gaze turned toward the back of the cave. Flecks of sparkly rock dotted the cave walls. It led far deeper into the mountain than she had realized at first. After a great distance, it wound into a corner. A pile of fluffy blankets and spongy sleeping mats had been tucked into a small alcove just before the corner. They lived here. They must have been hiding from High Queen Alessandra. A dragon with blue eyes and brilliant pastel scales peeked its head around the corner at the back of the cave. She recognized it as the same dragon they had with them when they found her in Bitter Thorn. Turning back to the others, she shook her head. I cannot think of anything that would have changed the destination of the door. Even while she said it, she glanced down at her hands, and something sparked inside her. She opened her mouth, but immediately clamped it shut again. I know that look. Severin continued to chop the potatoes and carrots on his ceramic plate, but an amused glint had filled his eyes. Folding her hands into her lap, Elora glanced at him. What look? From the side of the room, Tindra grinned. Had she noticed the look, too? Do not disregard something just because it seems strange or impossible. I cannot tell you how many things I have discovered from impossible situations. Her grin rose as she shrugged. Faerie is unpredictable. They could tell Elora had a guess. An impossible guess. Though it felt ridiculous to admit, words tumbled from Elora's mouth. Purple sparks burst from my fingertips just as I entered the door. She shook her head. Or maybe they did. I could have imagined it. Severin tapped his chin before he went back to the vegetables. Perhaps your magic changed the destination of the door. The tree stump tilted as Elora leaned forward on it. Can magic do that? It depends on what kind of magic you have. Tindra paired her explanation with a prodding expression. Severin donned an identical one. Letting the stump fall back against the ground, Elora looked down at her hands. I do not know what kind of magic I have. I've only used it twice, and both times were unusual. Severin dumped the chopped vegetables into a cast-iron pot. Perhaps a more important question to ask is, why were you brought here specifically? Looking to the side, he shared another look with his beloved. For a moment, it seemed like his gaze shifted to the rock table and the items scattered over it. Tindra gave a tiny nod, but it could have been Elora's imagination. Before indecision could nod her, Elora jumped to her feet. High Queen Alessandra captured Prince Brannick, she gulped. Again. The words pricked on their way out. The air around them felt thicker, too. I have to rescue him again, obviously, but I have no idea how to do it. High Queen Alessandra stole the necklace you gave me last time, so I do not even have a way inside the palace without her sensing my presence. Whatever expression had been on Tindra's face fell away. She blinked. You think you can rescue Prince Brannick from Fairfrost Palace? Elora had never been so grateful to finally have her memories back from her first visit to Faerie. She stood taller. Since I am the one who rescued him the first time, yes, I know I can do it. Her shoulders wilted. But I was mortal then. I had no magic for the High Queen's enchantment to sense. Another look passed between Tindra and Severin. The High Queen's brother nodded at his beloved as if she had asked him a question, even though neither of them had spoken. Were all couples this way with each other? Tindra darted across the cave to a large bag made of blue and silver brocade. After reaching inside it, she pulled out a necklace with a string of opals and a bright pendant at the end. Elora had to temper her gasp. Tindra had given her an identical necklace when she snuck into Fairfrost Palace to free the sprites. It could block the High Queen's magic-sensing enchantment. white blonde hair.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?